Hi, thanks for being in a new video. Xiaomi just unveiled the new Xiaomi 15 Ultra in China, so let's talk about it. We have to start. Let me remind you that this is the Chinese edition, but on Sunday Xiaomi is expected to make the presentation in Barcelona of the global version. So for now we are going to give these first impressions of the Chinese edition, but remember that lately Xiaomi has made changes of the Chinese edition with respect to the global edition, so do not yet diss. I'm not sure that this version is going to be the one that will be sold globally, although it is highly likely that there will not be too many changes, but I make this disclaimer to make everything very clear. So let's start by talking about the design, where this device has a very attractive touch. The back cover comes with a dual finish in two options, white with green or white with black. Personally, I found the white with green edition very nice. I would like to have that one also. There are other editions in glass with black and white finishes and different textures. And just like the last generation, there are also special editions with an additional kit that adds a small handle to better hold the device in black with red or white with gold configurations, so now they have two combinations that makes it more attractive. Personally, I like the white with gold edition better. Overall, it is a device that looks very similar to the last generation. In fact, in terms of specifications, you will also notice that it is very similar to the last generation. But let me go mentioning some subtle changes that could make a difference. We will find a thickness of 9.35 millimeters in the glass edition, and in the synthetic leather edition, it will have a thickness of 9.48 millimeters. So it is slightly thicker with respect to the last generation, which hints that Xiaomi is not following the trend of Apple and Samsung that every generation try to make the cell phone thinner. In this case, Xiaomi prefers to keep a relatively thick design, but integrating a relatively large battery and the camera system that bets on everything. In this case, the glass editions have the weight of 226 grams and editions with synthetic leather cover amount to 229 grams, i.e. a very similar weight to the last generation, even higher in some variants. So what I tell you is confirmed, it does not plan to make your device thinner or lighter. The screen, we could say that it is exactly the same as the last generation. We do not need major changes. We only see an increase in peak maximum brightness. It has a size of 6.73 inches, 2K AMOLED resolution with 120 Hz in the refresh rate. I insist there is not too much to improve here. But if we will see a new level of processing for this screen, which by the way now reaches 3200 nits. When the last generation was 3000 nits, this obviously when you watch HDR content. But speaking of protection, it is the second generation of glass developed by Xiaomi, which according to figures from the brand is 25% more resistant, then it is an important improvement. Although we do not know if the global version will retain its own Xiaomi glass or bet on Corning Gorilla Glass something, and it also has IP68 just like the last generation, which sounds strange because Chinese manufacturers are mostly betting on integrating not only IP68, but also IP69, so you can even submerge the phone and take underwater pictures. Well, I think that would have been a good addition in this model, especially considering that the last generation was already in IP68. So in this sense, Xiaomi continues still the same level of resistance, which is not bad, but seeing what several Chinese manufacturers are doing, we wanted to see a little more resistance. It also maintains stereo sound, and the natural evolution is given in the processor. Since the last generation was Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 and now bet on Snapdragon 8 Elite, the most powerful processor of the moment with very large capacities. Also comes with up to 16 gigabytes of RAM LPDDR5X and up to a terabyte of storage UFS 4.1. Specifically in the storage technology, yes, we should see an improvement, because previously it was UFS 4.0. So it is expected to have more read and write speed, and that will give you more agility when installing applications or when working video editing and other things. But since I touched on video, let me tell you about the cameras where we see evolution and steps backwards at the same time. Let me explain one by one why the camera system is one of the most attractive of this device. In fact, also why they have had to make a change in the distribution of their cameras, as they now incorporate a new periscope telephoto lens made by Samsung, and it is the famous HP9, which is probably the cause of the device having such a high thickness. But let me tell you one by one. First, we meet the 50 megapixel Sony Lightyear 900 main camera. That is, it is exactly the same as the last generation. In this case with aperture f1.63, but unlike the last generation, we do not find variable aperture, so this is a surprise because usually Chinese manufacturers do not take steps backwards. But in this case, they have decided to remove this feature that could be attractive to some people. Although it must be said, in practical life there wasn't that much difference between f1.63 and f4.0, especially in terms of depth of field. Obviously in terms of light input there is going to be a difference, but most smartphones by themselves go for brighter apertures, and although f4 would allow you to have a more even focus for macro photography. This device in the telephoto camera already has macro capabilities, so I don't consider it a very serious step backwards, but let me know what you think in the comments. The ultra-wide angle camera remains similar with 50 megapixels on the sensor, also with macro capability with 5 centimeters distance thanks to having autofocus. But in this case, the aperture has changed from f1.8 to f2.2. And this changed the truth. I do consider it a little more significant because surely at night we will see that it can get to suffer more than the last generation. And for zoom, we find two telephoto cameras. The middle telephoto camera has a focal length of 70 millimeters. Previously it was 75 millimeters, so we see slightly less optical zoom. But it's not such a big deal. It retains the 50 megapixel Sony IMX858 sensor and retains the f1.8 aperture, which is quite bright for a telephoto lens, plus macro capabilities at 10 centimeters away and optical stabilization. So far there are subtle differences. But the main difference will be in the periscope camera, where Samsung's HP9 is incorporated. Here we will find 200 megapixels with f2.6 aperture and 100 mm focal length. The last generation had aperture f2.5, so it was slightly brighter and in fact had more optical zoom because it reached 120 millimeters, i.e. about 5x digital zoom. So now it has less optical zoom, one slightly more closed aperture that gives less light entry. But the attraction is in the 200 megapixel sensor, which by merging the pixels can do a better job in lighting and in the daytime can give you cropping inside the sensor that helps the digital zoom look like optical. Zoom at different focal lengths, it would have to be put to the test, but this is the new photographic system that not only has changes in the sensors, but also in the lenses and the cover that comes on top. So Xiaomi has worked in a special way with Leica to make the light entry as clean as possible, and on their website they have shared an example of how it looks next to a high-end smartphone. Although they have not specified which model it is, but it is very clear the demonstration of how the light enters very clean and avoids perfectly well the reflections. Unlike other devices that could generate some spots from the reflections and little contrast in the image. Definitely the result is exceptional. It will surely compete for being one of the best devices in terms of photography in this range and with respect to video. You can record in 8K at 30 frames per second or 4K at 120 frames per second as maximum qualities, although it is something we already saw from the last generation. The front camera remains at 32 megapixels with the ability to record in 4K at 60 frames per second. The battery will be another key point of evolution with respect to the last generation, as we now have a capacity of 6,000 mAh compared to 5,300 that we saw last generation. I think this will make many users happy because I have asked them on multiple occasions if they prefer the strategy of Samsung and Apple to make cell phones thinner while maintaining a very similar battery capacity, or prefer this bet that Xiaomi is making that they do not care if they increase the thickness a bit but give you a much larger battery. In this case it supports 90 watts wired charging, 80 watts wireless charging, and also has reversible wireless charging. That is the same as last generation. It will also support 5G Wi-Fi 7, but a new addition will be the presence of Bluetooth 6, and another novelty is that the fingerprint reader is now ultrasonic. This allows the emission of intense light is not necessary, in addition to the recognition. It is faster, and even if your finger is a little wet, it will recognize it. It is an evolution that was requested, because Samsung has had the ultrasonic fingerprint reader for many generations. But for some reason, several Chinese manufacturers were still betting on the optical fingerprint reader. Finally, we see this new addition that finishes refining a good experience. The device comes with HyperOS 2.0 based on Android 15. It is expected to be a more refined operating system, let's just hope. I hope it doesn't have ads all over the place and that it's not crashing, but overall it looks like an attractive new generation device. Now let me share with you the pricing. For the 12 gigabytes of RAM version with 256 of storage, we will find 6,499 yuan. That is approximately $895. That is 18,330 pesos more or less. On the screen, you see the reference price in other currencies. Although remember that the prices here are not the same as those there. The most expensive edition of 16 gigabytes of RAM with 1 terabyte of storage has a price of 7,799 yuan. That is more or less $1,070, which is approximately 22,000 pesos. On the screen, you see the reference price in other currencies to give you an idea, but remember that the prices here are not the same as those there. Remember that in a few days will be the global launch and I will be telling you all about this device. Stay tuned. For the moment, we have reached the end of this video. If you liked it, you know you can tell us and we'll see you next time.